Okay, so we need to put Facebook. We started in 1 minute, just let us finalize the sharing on Facebook.
Yeah, I'm not sure why this had asked me to download a new updated Zoom, but I've been Zooming a lot, but who knows?
It is weird because I never had to update the Zoom. But...
Oh, did you just update it?
No, no, never.
I don't know. Maybe there's like hopefully I don't have a.
Yesterday,
my kids.
There is a new update for Zoom.
Okay, so it got to you before.
Yes.
Yeah. I thought maybe I had a bug with the kids, so from them using it. But.
Okay, so I think we are gonna. Okay, so we start. So, hello everyone. I hope you are all in good health. I'm glad to have you all on board today for our hot talk entitled City Project Ideas, reflecting on public spaces used in Kuwait pre and post COVID-19. The talk will be moderated by our active and enthusiastic member, Maureen. Thank you, Maureen. But before handing over to Maureen, allow me to speak a bit about Architect Hub Qatar. Architect Hub Qatar is an inclusive professional networking and the knowledge-sharing community of architects, architecture industry professionals, and architecture enthusiasts from across the globe. We do create events for the diverse and intellectual wisdom of the crowd, keeping architects connected to peers and wider markets, local and global. Well, I want to remind you all also about some features about the session. Our session will be recorded and live streaming on Facebook as well. And in order to maintain a better quality of the sound and fluid discussion, please everyone to put himself during the talk and to share your thoughts in chat or by raising the hand. And I think do not interrupt the speakers when they are presenting their subject, unless Maureen will give you the speech in the end. So thank you again for your presence, and I hope you will enjoy the session. So Maureen, please.
Okay. Thank you, Slim. Thank you so much. Thank you, Architects Hub, and thank you for our guests for joining. My name is Maureen Ferry. I'm a Hub member here in Qatar, and I'm an architect and educator. And on May 20th, I gave a Hub talk here to talk about transforming feasible street transformations here in Qatar after COVID, given that we know there's some prolonged delays in getting back to where we were. And I just presented some ideas in the context of what's going on in the world, and doing the research, I found there are lots of references to cities in Europe and North America, maybe the traditional references that we'll always see, like Paris, Seattle, Vancouver, and but there wasn't so much about the region here. And so after our talk and being enthused with the conversations we had, I stumbled on some research from our esteemed guests, and I reached out to them, and I wanted them to share their experience of their research about public space in Kuwait, given that we are sort of proximate in many ways, different of course than others, but I thought it would be interesting to hear the research that they were doing and to further this discussion a little bit. So if just to briefly introduce our guests, and I will have them explain their research when they give their presentation. Alexandra Gomez is a research officer at London School of Economics Cities Spatial Analysis, and I'll let you explain a little more. Dr. Asseel Al-Ragam is Associate Professor of Architecture and Vice Dean for Academic Affairs, Research and Graduate Studies in the College of Architecture at Kuwait University. And Ms. Sharifa Alshalfan is an architect, urban researcher, and educator advising the Kuwait Foundation. And the group together, I had a chance to speak with them about their research, and I asked them to present some ideas and some of their findings. So we'll do that for the first part of the conversation, and then afterwards we'll open the discussion. I noticed from our people signing up, we do have quite a few people joining from around the world, so it would be interesting also to hear your comments and ideas, and I will be moderating that after they have a chance to present. What I do ask is to raise hand or chat, so that we can do this in a structured fashion. So I will pass along to, let's see, we're going to share screen. We're going to have Dr. Asseel will start.
I'm just going to share the screen.
Okay, thank you. And thank you very much for agreeing to come.
Let me know when you see it full screen, okay? It's still not.
And I'm going to put myself on mute.
Okay. All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I hope everyone is well. I want to thank members of the Architects Hub and Maureen for reaching out to us and starting this conversation. We hope this discussion, hopefully many more, will bridge knowledge gaps across the GCC, and we can all certainly benefit from lessons learned in this COVID-19 environment. So our reflections today are part of a year-long project that examined the design and use of public space in Kuwait that was then translated into policies for urban governance. It is a research that is jointly sponsored by LSE Middle East, the Kuwait Foundation for the Advancement of Sciences, and Kuwait University, and that's basically each one of us. However, just some caveats before we begin. We started our research before this pandemic really turned our lives upside down. So that really wasn't the focus of the research to begin with, but we quickly had to reconcile with this new normal, and we found out that our recommendations are necessary in today's COVID-19 world. So we're also aware that some of our attendees were either present in the LSE Cities webinar that took place a week ago, or were not able to join then. This webinar is slightly different, and we won't be going into the details of method here, but we will give a background and draw from our research in ways that speak directly to urban design and public space use. Next, please, Alex. For those who are not familiar with our case study, the city-state of Kuwait is a constitutional emirate with a land area of about 17,400 square kilometers and a population of around 4.8 million, from which 2/3 are non-Kuwaitis. This population is growing rapidly, and according to the United Nations, it is expected to increase by 50% in 2100. And accommodating this growth through sustainable urban development is an absolute necessity. But mostly this increase has been a challenge for the state, and master plans are often out of step with this population growth. Since the discovery of oil in 1938, the city has rapidly expanded, and it is supported by a road system that encircles suburban residential neighborhoods and other monofunctional districts. This planning standard has historical roots in an infamous 1963 report called Traffic in Towns, prepared by Colin Buchanan. As many other planners of his time, Buchanan championed the car and developed road systems that weaved across cities. Why is he important for us? It's because he proposed Kuwait's 1972 master plan that eventually led to the current cycle of urban sprawl that we're finding very difficult to break today. So what you'll notice from the image is that this type of car-centric planning continues to this day with little attention paid to public space and its social potential. Unlike other cities around the world that are exploring sustainable methods of development, Kuwait's urbanization patterns are leading to higher levels of motorization that negatively impact individual health and the environment. And Kuwait, not unlike other Gulf cities, is planned to accommodate the car. And public space is neglected, making walking and cycling difficult and at times very dangerous. Monofunctional zoning and a disconnected transport system are additional obstacles to achieving a vibrant public realm. And another thing that is important to note here is public space is tied, or the concept of public space is tied to motorized transportation, which eliminates a sense of social engagement that could take place. We also see user behavior such as parked cars on sidewalks and annexed public space. And that really is some of the most destructive behaviors that blur the distinction between public and private space. These conditions negatively impact the quality of life in these districts, and these private claims on public space go unpunished, which certainly does not curtail this kind of behavior. So that's the tension that exists in public life in Kuwait that hinders the development of vibrant communities. So we focus on the ways that urban policies and design can promote the necessary cultural and social changes that will create dynamic and equitable communities. And our focus on the streets in particular emerges from the idea that as a basic element found in any residential area, design interventions can bring forward the potential of streets as open, shared spaces. And Sharifa and Alex will talk about this in more detail, but we're noticing promising signs as people navigate COVID-19 lockdowns. Next, please. Next. Additionally, we have to contend with the disparity in public space use in high and low density neighborhoods that you can see on the slide that over the years have separated Kuwaitis from non-Kuwaitis. Most non-Kuwaitis live in high density clusters and depend on public transport for movement, while most Kuwaitis live in large single family homes and depend on private vehicles for their day-to-day activities. So this single land use urban development, together with climatically unfit design guidelines, housing types that are based on cultural and social preferences, inefficient public transport, and subsidized resources have created car-dependent sprawl and poor pedestrian infrastructure. And these urban planning standards have shaped social behavior where those who can drive will not walk. And so with high levels of physical inactivity, obesity, and pollution, there are many studies that predict that changes to these kinds of behaviors will develop only with urban design improvements to the built environment. So this is what we did. We systematically observed 2 local streets in residential neighborhoods in Kuwait to understand the relationship between urban planning, design, and user behavior. And we used a comparative case study method and analyzed users' behavioral patterns and opinions. We also took note took into account the disparity between Kuwaitis and non-Kuwaitis in the ways that these sites are occupied. And we drew links between public space use and contentious terms such as citizenship and broader ideas of who are included and excluded in the design of public space. And this form of knowledge production, which we're focusing on, is focused on user experience and placemaking that engages the social dimension of formal and informal patterns of public use in the different scales of the city. So observations can be different acts of appropriation, from breaking basic municipal laws such as littering to more complex modes of urban negotiation such as jumping fences. And while we know that there are multiple factors at play here, we have now created a baseline from street level data that future interventions can then be measured against. So while this information is unique to Kuwait, and thanks again, Maureen and the Architects Hub for reaching out to us, it can still be used to encourage comparisons across GCC countries and other cities around the world. And in order for us to do that, we were very keen on using open source methods, such as those provided by Jan Gehl Institute that have global reach and global access, particularly since these methods are easily replicated. And on this basis, we really hope that our research opens up opportunities for public studies, space studies in Kuwait and the GCC, ones that encourage sustainable living in everyday life and counter popular myths of public space inactivity. And our goal from the beginning was to provide evidence-based recommendations that would encourage more equitable use of the public realm. And today, more than ever, we must strike a balance between what is public and what is private. As we've seen during this pandemic, public space plays an important role in nurturing a sense of belonging. And it can also prevent a drift into a privatized and a polarized society with all of its problems. And so reevaluating Kuwait's urban planning guidelines and policies is an important step towards this goal. And we believe that Kuwait can no longer support its current unsustainable methods of urban planning that prioritize motorization and neglects public space, because we feel that this destructive pattern will not only have adverse effects on individual health and the environment, particularly in today's rapidly changing climate, but it would also prevent any type of meaningful social engagement in the everyday life of the city. And I'll turn the conversation over to Alex, who will draw from our findings on public space use and urban design.
So these are 4 photos, and with these 4 photos, I hope that we can reflect some of our outputs. So I'm going to talk through some of our outputs, and I'll point you out to particular photos that somehow highlight that. So we structured our outputs, our project outputs, in 4 main sections. One, looking into density, mixed use, and macro accessibility. The other one, private car use. As Asseel said, it's dominantly, Kuwait is a car dominantly city. Another one, urban design, micro accessibility and walkability, and finally, climate and outdoor activities. However, these factors are very much interrelated, and with the help of these images, I'll go through some of these issues and how they interrelate themselves. In Kuwait, monofunctional zoning and single-family residential neighborhoods, especially those for Kuwaiti populations, are a barrier to successful use of public space. They create an incentive to motorization. However, increasing mixed-use levels and urban densities will not be enough. Updating infrastructure and providing reliable public transport modes to accommodate the growth is fundamental in Kuwait. As you see in Cordoba on your top left image, the annexation of public setbacks for car parking and other private uses, as we saw in our fieldwork as plantations and allotments, etc., they break the street connectivity and discourage people from walking, and at the same time produce unsafe environments for those who have to step into the street to avoid these barriers. The example of Salmiya on the top right illustrates the dominant formal and larger parking areas. So if you look from above into Kuwait, you see all these empty plots that are designated parking areas. So these are, we called formal parking areas. These represent 1/4 of the area around our case study street in Salmiya and 1/5 of all the area around our case study street in Cordoba. And we did a buffer of 5 minutes walk. So within 5-minute walk, what you have in an area is 1/4 of that area is in Salmiya, these areas for parking spaces, and 1/5 in Cordoba. In Salmiya, these larger car parking areas surpass by 160% the total housing footprint area. So the area occupied by the buildings. So you have more parking areas, areas designated for parking than buildings in Salmiya. Discouraging car traffic while improving pedestrian infrastructure with better sidewalk maintenance and materials, zebra crossings, pedestrian traffic lights, wayfinding, street signs are also important, and they are currently lacking in both case studies and their surroundings. They will increase street safety and they will increase permanence, or like we said, stickiness in public space. The few sidewalks existing in the area, when they're not obstructed, as we saw in the image above, in Cordoba, they're not well kept and they're not properly maintained, as you can see in the bottom left image that I'm showing. At the same time, our findings counter popular myths of public space use. It is often repeated that extreme temperatures in Kuwait are prohibitive and that climate restricts public space use. Still, temperatures vary, and for 8 months of the year, they're moderate. Our observations demonstrated that outside extreme periods, and we did only 2 periods, what we called the warmer periods and the less warmer periods. So one around 20, 30 degrees, the other one around 30 and 40 degrees. So outside these extreme periods, when we did the field work, weather did not seem to have a clear effect on the intensity of use. And that social demographic and type of activities appeared as a deciding factor in the use of public space. In fact, throughout the cooler and warmer seasons, streets were being used. However, mostly linked to necessary activities, and in particular in Cordoba, because Cordoba has around 3% mixed use when you compare with Salmiya that has 35% mixed use. In both periods, the largest user group were lower income non-Kuwaiti male workers. In Cordoba, streets are not used as public space, and they're found to be passageways or destination points for daily errands, like bank visits or car cleaning, good deliveries or construction activities, and mostly reached by car. In Salmiya, the situation is a bit different because of Salmiya Park, as you see on the right side. And the Salmiya Park, along with some other activities, commercial activities that exist in that area, attracted more people, so social activities dominated when compared with other more individual activities, but in these particular pockets. If climate-adapted urban form and urban design can help promote better use of public space, shaded areas are missing. As you can see from your bottom right image, you have Salmiya Park and the benches are mostly located under the sun. They're not located in the shade. Better walking conditions, public toilets, food and drink venues, and water drinking fountains were also some of the other elements mentioned by our survey participants to improve public space. So although the survey, when we asked people, how would you improve public space? Only one person referred specifically to shading areas. Most people reflected on different areas that somehow relate to climate and weather conditions. As I said, as the food and drink venues and water drinking fountains were quite prominent in our survey. So these simple fixes can dramatically alter the appearance, they can organize pedestrian traffic flow, and they can create safer streets and places for people to stay and enjoy rather than just walk through. So, however, successful public space improvement cannot be achieved with isolated measures. Efficient policies will have to consider the strong interdependent relation between urban planning, urban design, and social behavior, with some of its key elements provided in this slide on your right side. As mentioned before, our research also suggests that urban inactivity in Kuwait is mostly due to the physical environment and individual behavior, along with cultural factors, rather than to climatic conditions, at least when we talk about outside extreme periods of the heat. If the argument that extreme heat has a fundamental role in limiting the use of public space, Kuwait has still 8 months of moderate temperatures where public space can still be used, and Kuwait can adapt its urban form and its urban design into promote better uses and shaded areas. Finally, this project, as Asseel just mentioned, highlights the importance of a user-centered approach in the study of public space. We see a lot of studies linking walkability to indicators, to space syntax, but somehow our research using pads and GAL methods and toolkits could measure public space use and could and allowed us to not only do observation, but also talk to people and understand what are their needs in terms of public space, what do they enjoy in each of the areas, and what do they aim at having as something that can be promoted and improved in each of the areas. So as Asseel was saying, we created a baseline that can be used to compare different spaces in Kuwait, or even compare different periods of time. If there's an intervention that somehow reflects on a particular area, we can also compare before and after in Kuwait or even internationally. So Kuwait, as Asseel was saying, can no longer support its current and sustainable method of urban planning and prioritizing motorized infrastructure and neglecting urban public space, as this destructive pattern is already having adverse effects on individual health and the environment. As our study showed, it also reflects on public space use. Sharifa, I think I'll leave it up to you now.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks, Asseel. Hello, everyone. So Kuwait, similar to other GCC countries, most of the leisure activities take place indoors. We have, we boast the largest malls in the world. We have the biggest ski resort that is also indoors. What that means is that all these venues are destinations, which explains why, as Asseel and Alex have just shown, the public space in between these destinations is neglected. We also need to not forget that these destinations, whether it's a mall or a restaurant, are mainly focused on commercial activities. They're also not exactly public. And this distinction of these seemingly public spaces that are actually privatized has really become obvious during COVID-19. These are images from last month when Kuwait was on total curfew. On the picture on the left, we see at the bottom a local neighborhood similar to Qurtuba, one of the neighborhoods that we studied, which was mainly focused on Kuwaitis living there. This is the street when there were no cars. Because we had total curfew in Kuwait, we had 2 hours in the afternoon where people were allowed to walk, but cars weren't allowed and drivers weren't allowed to drive. And then we all of a sudden started seeing this phenomena of children on their bikes, of families walking on the street, and this is in May, so the weather is already getting quite warm. The picture on top of this on the left is an image from a park that is in the same neighborhood, and even though with lockdown measures it's supposed to be closed, in reality it's not. You can, as you can see in the picture, you can very easily access it, but people didn't choose to go to the park. Rather, they decided to be on the street. And when you think about why, the reason for that is, perhaps just from the picture, you can see that there isn't much that the park is offering that is different from the street. The picture on the right shows another area of Kuwait, similar to Salmiya, and this image in particular is of a main road. So having people walk very comfortably in the middle of the road is something that is not very common in Kuwait or anywhere else in the world. But again, with the curfew measures, even though cars weren't allowed, even though people weren't allowed to drive, certain individuals, due to their work or other reasons, had permits to drive. So as you can see in the back, there are a couple of cars who are still driving on the road, yet the driver's behavior completely changed. All of a sudden, people were given priority. And the reason I wanted to share this is because it just shows you how quickly people's behavior changes when the environment changes. Next, please. So like Maureen mentioned, these are just some images from different cities around the world and the different measures that they're taking to respond to social distancing measures and other COVID things that we have to do today. So on the left is Rotterdam, and what they've done there is they've taken up the city has allowed restaurant owners to take up the parking space in the street to use as a patio for dining space in order to minimize the amount of people who are indoors. Pictures on the right show different examples of how quickly streets have transformed to accommodate for cyclists. And the last picture at the bottom on the left is from architects from the Czech Republic, and what they've done is they've created this design where cities can adapt and can use in order to have safer dining areas and public space. And already they've created, implemented one prototype, and they're hoping to roll this out. So what I wanted to show here is just that how different cities are responding to our new normal, and how architects are stepping up, how mayors and governors are responding. And what I wanted to end with here is just for us to discuss, how do you see Kuwait or other GCC cities responding to the need for being in public space and being outdoors? And as in Kuwait especially, we have seen that the weather, just like how we have shown in our research, is really not a problem. Only yesterday I was near the seafront. We're in the middle of June. It was 45 degrees at 5 p.m. and there were people cycling, there were people walking, there were people just hanging out. So I want to just end here and open up the conversation to, how do you think people are going to be demanding better public space use here in the GCC region, or if governments are going to actually respond? Thank you.
I'm going to, thank you. I love, thank you so much how you ended that. I have many questions here myself. So I just, Slim, can people raise hands, or if people want to ask questions, are they going to post it on the chat? Or I don't have any, I can't see a hand raised.
I can't also see any hand in the back. If anyone can raise the hand or directly post on the chat.
On the chat. Okay. So I'm just to start off, and this might be also a question that I'm curious from your study, because you said you surveyed people and you were talking about people-centered, how would you say that the planning is going to be, should be centered on what the people are looking for. I'm curious, because the people seem to identify the things that were missing: water, restroom facilities, etc. I'm curious, would it be of interest, or do you think you would get different types of reactions if you would sort of do the same survey after this experience of the lockdown? That's one question. And the other question I had is, I noticed in the beginning you mentioned about the tremendous growth rate that you're expecting in the region, and so the photos that you've shown would encourage you to develop infill ideas and infill typologies. But I'm also wondering, like strategically, are you thinking more about the infill strategies and infill, or sort of reworking the existing, or how is that discussion different from the growth strategy, and how are you planning or advising on ideas for the future? Because obviously that means new builds, or is that densification, or I don't know, is it all one together? So that sort of derails Sharifa's question, but I can't speak from so much experience here in the region. So those were things that I wanted to know. If maybe you could start with that, and hopefully we'll get some folks to comment as well.
I can speak to the method, and then I'll let Alex and Sharifa continue about, maybe the infill question that you mentioned, Maureen. What's great right now is that we've got a baseline street level data, and what ends up happening is that if we do go back into those streets, we can then test again and see what are the things that might have changed, what are the responses, what are the needs that the users want in a post-COVID environment, and then work accordingly. But I think our interventions have to do with how do you improve streets? How do you improve public space so that they're used and they're more functional in the sense that they've got the urban amenities that allows for longer stays as opposed to people just passing through those areas? And I'll let Alex and Sharifa continue.
In terms of the infill and growth rate, so Kuwait is growing outwards, but there's still a lot of empty space in the metropolitan area, and in particular around the central, the CBD area. There's a lot of empty plots, and we showed this, Sharifa and I worked in this project, Resource Urbanisms, that demonstrated that there's still a lot of infill to be done. So rather than suggesting that the growth continues the same pattern as it has continued, even with higher densities, because there are higher densities, you know, far from the center. It's Kuwait is made of different clusters of density. So you have, it kind of sprawls with low densities, but then some areas pop out, not necessarily all together. They pop out around the metropolitan area. So I feel that thinking of infill with if you have to expand it within what is already the urban footprint of the city. Try not to expand beyond that. But I think in terms of public space, the idea is a lot of the new developments, I think, will think now, because of all that has been discussed about public space, a lot of the new developments will be thinking about public space. The question is what's already built up. All these neighborhoods that we explored, Talmi and Cortuba, are quite consolidated. So how can we improve these neighborhoods? And I think that is the key issue in a city like Kuwait, because we don't want, I think, at least in my opinion, we shouldn't want something like Masdar, for example, which should be a good initiative, but it's completely out of the city. It's located in a place where you have to drive there, even if then you can walk. That creates gentrification, etc., etc. So you should be able to rework with the existing city that you have already. And I think that our idea that you need to understand that you have to deal with densities, mixed use, and behavior. If you take space from the cars, a lot of the space will be empty for people to walk in the pavements. What we see from Sharifa image, that people are walking in the streets, they're walking in the streets because the pavements are occupied by cars that are parked. So thinking about how to address this in the Kuwait that already exists seems to be more important than how to address what's coming up. Although what's coming up is obviously also important. One thing that I want to say is also that the street layout in for example, in Cortuba, and we did these measurements, the street layout is quite comfortable. If you had like the space that cars are occupying now, if you would transform that into a sidewalk, a proper sidewalk, that would be quite a big sidewalk for an area like that, for a residential area. And we also showed in our project that the co-ops, because the neighborhoods in Kuwait they're self-sustained in the sense that they have an area where you have a commercial supermarket, a school. Sharifa and Asseel can explain this better, but so the co-ops are the center point when you go for basic shopping. The co-ops are in less than 5 minutes away, straight line if you measure it in a map, or more or less 12 minutes walking from our case study areas. And still people drive there. So dealing with what is the existing of the city, I think it's fundamental before we start thinking of how to expand the city. Sharifa.
Yeah, basically I just want to add that the slide that Alex had shown, which is the three things that need to work together, which is basically urban planning. So you mentioned mixed use, Maureen, and yeah, that will go down under urban planning. Urban design, so simple things like shading, like trees. I mean, there's one street that's now, because of the COVID situation, people have started using so much more simply because it has trees. And then the third thing is user behavior, and this is what the premise of this research was based on. What do people want? How are they behaving? why do we not respond to them? Why do we detach ourselves from users? And also with the COVID situation, we need to rethink the whole idea of working from home. Many companies around the world have announced that there's not gonna be office space anymore. People are gonna work from home. And if it's not gonna be as radical, but definitely there's gonna be a reduction, especially since how it's been more than 3 months and people have realized how doable it is. And perhaps even it's actually through these Zoom meetings, people from around the world are now a lot closer to each other than they were 3 months ago. And picking up on the idea of the co-op and the neighborhood, so Kuwait is designed where the neighborhood unit has all its amenities within the unit itself. So you have the residential units, then you have that's supporting clinics, supporting schools, police station, library, so all the essential amenities except for work. So everything is, like Alex has mentioned, is within walking distance. But the problem is it is very much centrally governed. So central government decides what happens in the park. And this is why we're seeing neglected parks, we're seeing neglected public space in the neighborhoods themselves, because the city has expanded beyond the means of central government to be able to manage all these things.
Okay. So now I have a few questions lined up here in the queue. I have a question from Omaima, Clemens, and then Slim. So we can take them as we go. I can read the question, or Omaima, would you like to speak? Okay, all right. I will read the question here. It says, are there any plans in Kuwait by authorities ongoing now to create regulations for public space use that address planners as well as the general public? I heard there are some apps are in use or in process. So maybe comment about this with respect to technology tools. And Omaima mentioned there might be something like this that China has done. Do you have any comments about that?
Shall I answer?
Any of you?
Sure. We are not aware of any plans, unfortunately, that the authorities are creating for public space use that respond to COVID in specific. In general, there is the 4th master plan that's underway right now in Kuwait, and there is a lot of discussion on trying to have more compact cities, to improve public space. There's also a zoning code that's being introduced at Kuwait municipality that really addresses these issues. So yes, this is happening, but specifically as a reaction to COVID, I'm not sure. Or other question, sorry, the question wasn't specific to COVID, but yes, there are plans. Their implementation then becomes a challenge, again, because there are plans at the central government level. So we hopefully they will address these issues. And then regarding the apps, I'm not sure what exactly, Omaima, you're referring to, but there is an app for social distance, what is that, tracking, COVID tracking. So this is, yeah, it's called Shlonik, and I don't know how much it's being used, to be honest, but the idea is it's a social distancing and tracking or something for COVID in specific.
Just to add another thing, I think what Sharifa was mentioning about the 4th master plan, I think what we're also trying to argue here is that there needs to be these kinds of policy papers that align with master planning, because sometimes master plans, as flexible as they might be, run the risk of being out of step with reality. And I think one of the things that we were hoping is that we can speak to the everyday use of public space. And I think that's why We were keen on using observation, looking at the street, looking at users. Master planning, when we talk about master planning, it's a completely different process. You're bringing in stakeholders. It's looked at on a more abstract level. The zoning codes, and I commend the fourth master plan and the team that put this together, because there are really interesting things and pockets in that, in the design of that master plan. But if there aren't a research or policy papers that align themselves with the everyday, then we will run the risk of having more spaces that are not usable. And I think that's where all of us sort of agree, and that's where all of us came together and did this research. I think that's one of a key point takeaway. Another thing about just Umayma, to talk about the Shlonik, it's an app that was used to just monitor people coming back, particularly those who are coming back from abroad, and it geolocated everybody, and just to make sure that people were people maintained certain, so they stayed at home.
Sorry, are you still speaking? I have.
Can you hear me? Yeah. It's aligned to a bracelet, and so there was this, and it's the data is centralized with the state. So that's just to give you an idea about the app that Sharifa mentioned.
Oh, sorry, I just want to mention one thing about technology. The Public Authority for Housing Welfare is designing a smart city, not necessarily in relation, I'm not sure what their plans are, but there is experimentation there and with technology.
Okay, excuse me. Sorry, I was just kicked out for a second. Very angry. Oh, now it's all fresh. There was a question from Clemens. Someone, Clemens, I saw. Now my chat has been erased. Is there, can someone read? I'm sorry, I got kicked out and joined back in. I apologize.
Okay, I read it.
Can you read it, Slim?
Okay. So Clemens saying that thank you for this wonderful presentation. The increase in residential mobility in the time of COVID-19 has definitely pointed to crying need for more spaces catered for public use. One observation is that during Ramadan, many Kuwaitis take to the mall for their walks before Fatur. Could there be any room for enclosed areas in service of mobility and activity? For example, stadium, sports center that have also opened to public use. This is the question of Clemens.
Yeah. It's very interesting that you bring up Ramadan, because those pictures are actually from Ramadan that that were shown. So, which kind of tells you, again, back to our research, this whole idea about weather, and people do not use public space in hot weather. In Ramadan, when people are fasting, you think the last thing they want to do is be outside and the hot weather, but they did, which for me, in my personal opinion, I would rather we improve the street, the public space in the neighborhoods, rather than assign other areas where it will also just become another destination. Yes, I agree, there probably would be more public and open, more and open to all. Yet I think, you know, investing in the neighborhoods themselves, I think would do a great, you know, improvement to our public space in general.
I think to add just to what Sharifa was talking about, the idea of stadiums, malls, and other services or amenities, they become what Sharifa was talking about, destination points. And I think that's something that we noticed in our research. People go to these destinations, and that liminal space or that in-between space gets erased. What we were hoping for is to find a way to activate these spaces, that in-between space. So that is in fact not necessarily a destination that you're walking past and going through, but in fact you're spending time, you're being socially engaging, you're engaging with your environment, you're engaging with the people that are there. And so that's really one of the things that we're trying to find, urban design solutions and policies that can trigger that kind of activation, because otherwise then we're going to have more people driving to those destinations as opposed to really activating the neighborhood and activating these streets.
I just wanted to add that, you know, it's interesting from our survey, we did surveys in both Cordoba and Salmiya, and one is Cordoba is much less, like I said, it's around 3%. It has around 3% of the buildings with non-residential areas, so the level of mixed use is quite low compared with Salmiya that has around 30% of the buildings with other uses rather than also residential. And it is interesting that people in Cordoba, in the dominantly Kuwaiti neighborhood, they demand 30% of our responses were into mixed use. The levels of mixed use, the proximity to shopping areas, the proximity to food areas is quite important in these neighborhoods. And then in both neighborhoods, in Cordoba and in Salmiya, the second most, in terms of the rank, the second answer for both cases was walkability. So we see a lot of people, they want to be able to walk in their neighborhoods. They want to be able to shop in their neighborhoods. And green areas were also more dominant in Salmiya because there's already a park, so people want better areas. They want more spaces to sports. They want more. They go into the detail because there's already a small park. We can call it a pocket park. That it's a park like Sharifa was showing in her photo. That it's a local park, but you need to improve that local park because if not, like Sharifa was saying, the park doesn't offer anything that the street is offering right now. If the park doesn't offer shades, if the park doesn't offer a place to stay, to shop for food or to go for to use a public toilet, then why use the park and not use the streets like people are using now? So the idea is that just to say that from the surveys we did, it's very interesting how people think about improving the space they already have before thinking of going somewhere else.
Can I ask a
Yeah.
question?
Oh, let's see. Yes. Oh, let's see. We have
Maureen, can I ask a question? Abdullah.
Yes, go ahead. Please, go ahead.
Okay. Well, from your study, you are not showing whether you are following your master plan or it's just a study, whether your master plan with hierarchies or not, whether I mean, why you want to add more commercial, why you want to add more open area if there's like a master plan. You are saying you are doing the fourth master plan. Are you not following your master plan? Why it's high density certain buckets or pockets? If you have a master plan, then you don't have to do all this. Why the parking in the road? Is it to blame it in the people or to blame it in the master plan? Is it the authorities not implementing, or I mean, destroying the implementation, or the public? Because you make it sound, when you implement a Western style city planning, then you want those large roads, not sikkas, not walkable roads. You want this large road, which is meant to be for a cold area, meant to be for Europe and United States, not for this region. For this region, and you are using this road, it means you want cars. So you cannot put Kuwait and ask people to walk in a 60-meter road with 50-degree centigrade sun. This is impossible. And you are not even mentioning whether they should walk 100 meters or 200 or 300, 400. What is your study saying? Should people walk that long? Why the municipality or the urban planning allowing people to construct parking in the walkway? If it's according to regulation, then people should have their parking inside their villas, not outside their villas. I'm not saying it's not the same in Doha, it is the same. But again, this is like exceptions given by certain municipality, by certain authority. So it's not right, because if you are implementing, if you create small parcels like in Kuwait, 300 or 400 square meter, and allowing people to cover 90% or even 70%, then you are not asking people to put their car inside. And if they will put it outside, then they will use the walkway, and people will walk in the road. This is the same in United States. Even in United States, your entrance is exactly in the walkway, and it's cutting the walkway. You don't cover it, true, because you have like a parking inside your villa or your townhouse, but at least the ramp to your townhouse, cutting the walkway. So this is the American style. It's just we are copying it here. You are saying this is the 4th master plan. Plus, I think in Kuwait municipality, the people who are in charge of the master plan, they are civil engineers. So what do you expect from civil engineers? They are not urban planner.
So
I want to hear your comment and your answer.
Yeah, well, I would love to hear the comments and answer, but I want to somehow link it back to some of the other comments and questions, because so that is very observant. That so I recognize some of the photos that they're showing. I recognize places here as well. So it's maybe some commonalities there. However, obviously now in COVID, people have experienced this in a different way. And through the research that they have shown us, people are saying, wait, so the people are saying, well, we would like this, we would like that. So I think the question is, well, I would like to hear maybe what they would like to comment.
I'll ask you a question. Why you keep relating things to COVID? The city planning will stay as it is before COVID and after COVID. I don't think it will change, because when you do a master plan, it is for 25 years. It's not for 5 years. So when you do something for 25 years, you don't change it for COVID, because COVID might be for a year or 2 or 3 maximum. Something else might come after that. You don't change your city planning. This is my comment.
Okay, but in defense, yes, thank you. I can appreciate that, but I feel that what we need to recognize from the research that was presented, that number one, people say, oh, you don't want to walk, it's too hot in a Gulf city. Well, their research is saying it's not. You don't want to walk. COVID has shown that when the roads are open, the people are walking, even in May, even in June, even during Ramadan, when perhaps they might not be wanting to be active outside. So in a way, what the revolution of this process that's been happening here with the COVID is that people are showing that they do want these spaces, and that the human, any person you might survey in a neighborhood would say, wow, if I could just have this little walkway, I could ride my bike, or if I had a water fountain, or if there was a shelter here for me to sit down, I would go meditate in the park or something. And for example, Doha has, actually I invite our guests to come to Doha and see some of the beautiful park infrastructure that has been developed here, that has looked at a lot of those same questions, like sheltered play areas, like shaded play areas, outdoor exercise areas. There's some really beautiful examples here that I enjoy, and I see people from all different backgrounds of society here enjoying. So that's, I know that was just in my comment. I feel revelatory about their research, and in light of this pandemic, is that well, why not? Let's propose more solutions for that's. What do you think? We have so many questions here, and actually we're running out of time. Maybe I could just ask our guests to make a quick comment. We have like 2 minutes left. I really apologize. And I apologize to everyone with all the questions. What we can do is maybe I'll follow up with the guests to send them the questions that we have here and hopefully we can continue the conversation. Okay, we can go to 8:15 if people like, but let me hear your comments first. Go ahead.
Okay, excuse me? Can you hear? Yes, Moon. I want to ask the ladies, please. From the photo that you are presenting, I can see that the only the leisure places that you are talking about is only green parks and green places. And those parks, from the photo, I'm not sure if it's that. It's only punctual places, yani small. So you will like to go to these parks. Here in Qatar, we have a great, let's say, experience that all around the Corniche area and Bida Park, it's a very long park. So you don't have to, so you can access from many places. It's a long park all around the Corniche, almost 5 kilometers. So it's a long park. Do you have, so people can go there safe. There is directly social distancing. And you can access from anywhere from Doha, from many places, from the beginning of Doha here in, let's say, Al-Hitmi place, up to Al-Sad, to Al-Dafna. So it's a long, it's a 5 kilometer park. You have something like that in Kuwait? Thank you.
Yes, we do. We have a couple of parks like that. We have Al-Shahid Park, we have Salmiya Park, we have our Gulf Road, which is, you know, our seafront. So yeah, we do. But these are also, again, those are like destination parks, not your local neighborhood parks that we've studied in this study.
I think I just want to go back to the comments that were mentioned by the gentleman. I don't think our role here is to assign blame to any particular entity, neither the state nor the user. We're bringing to the forefront our observations and what we've seen. And we want to bring that observation and recommendation to the attention of authorities so that they can take them into consideration. Now, there's absolutely a master plan, but the master plan doesn't go into the details of that. The master plan is an abstract concept of what the vision for the city and how the city is supposed to grow on a local, national, and a metropolitan, and then a regional scale. And so when we're talking about street level research, that's where this kind of research becomes useful. It doesn't override what happens in the master plan. In fact, it complements it. And when we first initially mentioned about infill or the idea, when we're talking about the infill, it's more about looking at what we already have and what exists already on a city on a street level, and then trying to propose something that will in fact activate that space. So I think that's probably where. And yes, I agree. We're a consumer society, and to a certain extent, all of the GCC countries, and so we have an abundance of items, cars being one of them. But there are solutions that go beyond parking the car on the sidewalk, and I think those can be solutions that are on-street parking. There can be many other ways that we can deal with that, but there needs to be some sort of regulation as opposed to turning a blind eye, and I think that's what's happening mostly. Another thing that I wanted to just comment on is the idea of Western versus non-Western. I don't think we ever, we looked at the local context and we observed the local context, and we brought ideas that were part of surveys that were proposed by users. So it really isn't a Western Eastern conversation or context, but it really was driven by evidence that we gathered through the surveys. So I hope that answers your question.
I just wanted to shortly add one thing, two things, I think. Is that okay, Maureen?
Sure. There's lots of questions here, but I think this is important. Go ahead. Okay. And then we'll follow up. I'll just have one more. I can put two questions together here. Go ahead.
So following what my colleagues just said, and responding to this idea of the master plan being a 25-year plan, which is, I think what the master plan creates is directives, and those can influence what we call the planning at the higher level, our chapter that talks about mixed use and densification. So the master plan can address some of these issues that somehow can reflect on public space use, you know? And of course we can't plan for COVID, but we have to see COVID, and not COVID itself, but some of the behaviors that emerge from COVID as something that you have to reflect on in the future. So it's not that planning have to change because of COVID, but it does need to address that, you know, people are willing to use public space, and people are willing to, you know, to occupy the streets if the cars are not being driven. Related to the parks, I think the idea is that there are two different parks. One is the city level park where people go for particular activities because there's a restaurant there, or you want to go and for a run, a large run. But I think these small parks, they play a different role, and they're fundamental, and we show that with the Salmiya study, to, for example, for families with kids, because there's a playground there. You don't want to drive and park your car, drive half an hour to go to a big park just to go to a small playground with your kids. But you may have to you can do that in a small park. So I think the roles are, I'm not saying one is better than the other. I just feel that they're complementary. And the fact that people may be, you know, working from home in the future more often, that brings that people will need to go out from their houses and have something in proximity more often. Because I think if people have to drive to their work and then on the way back they drive to the park, that's okay. But if you stay more often at home, then your local park is going to become more important. And it's already important, as we showed from the Salmiya case, where a lot of families go, a lot of people go for, you know, exercise that is not so much about running, but like, you know, they're doing gymnastics, you know, by themselves. But so if you improve these small parks, I think, you know, we can only expect these parks to be even more used.
Yeah. Well, and this ties back to sustainability initiatives and what Dr. Asseel mentioned about health, people's health, if people are walking more. So these are all sort of, it's like a convergence of ideas that are thrown in our face and thrown in the whole public space right at this moment. So,
Maureen, I have just a comment to respond to Mr. Abdullah.
Yes, please, go ahead.
I think, yeah, I mean, you touched on a very good point. There is I know it's not the topic of our conversation today, but I think, yes, the master plan, there have been reports saying that, you know, there has been deviation from the master plan. Yes, there is misalignment between what the master plan says and what our building code says. But I think also there isn't the in-between. We have, in the municipality, we have a master planning department and we have the building code department. And now there's the introduction of the zoning code, which is kind of trying to fill that level in between. And again, we also go back to governance and centralized government doing actually not even doing urban design. So this is one of our issues. And also Kuwait, because we have an extensive housing welfare program, has affected the way our public space has become. And you talk about the houses being built up all the way to the edges, and this is because of a change in the building code, which allowed for cars, not allowed, which meant that cars now no longer park within your plot. And I think what COVID has shown us today is, yes, we do have large houses, but at the same time, there's no outdoor space even within the houses because we're building all the way to our plots. So I think this research on this and this COVID situation is not necessarily telling us let's rethink, let's change our planning, but maybe it's showing us certain things that our planning paradigm has missed.
Okay. And it has this is just related. So I'm just going to make one, I'm smushing two questions together that kind of relate to what you're talking about. And then I would just like maybe one of you to answer, and then we're going to have Slim close. So we'll have to close it by 8:15 our time. So unfortunately, I hope we can continue. First of all, please, we would like to know your links to your research paper, please, because I think we see a lot of folks are really interested. And I think the typology of your study could also be something that maybe we could really learn from. So I look forward to getting that information. If you have it published or not, please do forward it and we'll share it with the group. This question here is, I'm combining two questions from Mr. Fos Al-Saba and Fatima Al-Kandari. I'm just gonna briefly, so one is talking about the street in Salmia that the municipality transformed into walkable mixed-use area managed by the National Fund for SME Development. So the question is, are you imagining more mixed-use projects to be public-private partnerships, or should these endeavors be strictly managed by the government? So that relates back to some of the comments you just made with the master planning. And then the question from Fatima comes at it from a different angle, is that would kind of, let's see, would resident-led bottom-up approaches be possible in Kuwait? So those are sort of questions maybe on the spectrum. If one of you would like to comment on this. So is this, how is it government-led versus resident-led initiatives? How do you see that in the context particularly of Kuwait? Would someone like to answer?
Sure, I'll answer. So I think for those familiar with Kuwaitis and Kuwait, we're very vocal on, in our parliament and with our demands and what we like the government to do and not do and things like that. However, when it comes to public space, urban planning, urban design issues, for some reason, this is something that is not discussed as much. We have seen very few grassroots movements asking for improvements in public space. There's a group of cyclists who are calling for safer bike lanes. But in general, it's not something that's really being demanded, and I don't really know the reason for that. But we're hoping, and this is why I think we are having this discussion today, that what COVID has shown us is that improving public space is essential for our well-being. And we're hoping that this COVID situation is gonna make people ask and demand for better design of public space.
There, I'm on mute myself. I like this. Improving public space is essential for well-being. I think, I hope we can all agree on that. I hope we can continue to share. I'm really, really sorry to cut this short, but we've actually gone over. Thank you to our guests for coming and staying longer. I just want to remind everyone to sign up for our Architects Hub newsletters, and they are coming twice weekly, so not to be missed. We have a lot of great events and things happening. Maybe Slim, you'd like to, and I just want to say thank you for our guests. Like I said, I hope we can really continue. I'm very sorry for all of the great comments and questions we received. We'll try to share them with the guests, and then hopefully the conversation can continue in another forum like this, or if you have the chance to interact with them in another venue, then we make sure we get that to them. Slim?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Maureen, for being here today. Thanks a lot to our speakers, Dr. Sharifa, Alexandra, and Asseel. Thanks very much. It was an interesting and challenging subject. We hope to have you always with us in all our events. I want also to thank all the participants today. Follow us on our social media, on our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and soon on Snapchat and TikTok. Please do join us this Friday. We have architects entertainment night to be on Friday. This week will be Diala will be interviewing Dr. Kamal Jalouka, which is a former special planning national consultant from Jordan. So the event will be 7:30. I already posted the link here in Zoom. I'll be sending for you tomorrow, by tomorrow, the links via email. Thanks again to everyone. Thanks our panelists, and stand with us. We have great events. So
thank you all for this great lecture.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.